Nevertheless, I wish that physicists would refrain from using the word God in their special metaphorical sense.
Remember Dawkins' earlier insinuation that religious people who professed faith were really insincere? Well, here comes a continuation of this insinuation. In this final paragraph in the subchapter, Dawkins wants to hammer home the point that any time we hear a scientist use the word God, as in, I believe in God, they are really only using it in a special metaphorical sense, not the sense that the rest of us would be using. Notice how this assertion would completely reframe any remark by any scientist proclaiming the belief in God into its direct opposite. This will create a closed system of thought impervious to outside argument.
My title, The God Delusion, does not refer to the God of Einstein and the other enlightened scientists of the previous section. That is why I needed to get Einsteinian religion out of the way to begin with. It has a proven capacity to confuse. In the rest of this book, I am talking only about supernatural gods.
Capacity to confuse is right. Just what is Dawkins talking about? In this paragraph, he says that his title does not refer to the God of Einstein. Well, if that's the case, then the main thesis of his book is blown sky high. Why? Because if the title doesn't refer to Einstein's God, then it doesn't refer to Spinoza's God either, because Einstein himself told us earlier that his God was Spinoza's God. And Spinoza's God, as we saw in the user guide, is without question God, no atheism inferred or implied. So, when Dawkins says that his title only refers to a supernatural conception of God, not Einstein's conception, we're not really sure just what he means, since Einstein's conception is Spinoza's conception, and Spinoza's conception is no less supernatural than any other. And on this point, we should stress what may not be obvious, but which is surely true, that if there is a supernatural, it's natural. That is to say, nothing that naturally occurs falls outside of the category of a natural phenomenon, even though we might perceive it as such.
Dawkins goes on to explain how religious conflicts are mislabeled under group or ethnic strife.
In Northern Ireland, Catholics and Protestants are euphemised to nationalists and loyalists, respectively. The very word religions is Bowdlerised to communities, as in inter-community warfare. Iraq, as a consequence of the Anglo-American invasion of 2003, degenerated into sectarian civil war between Sunni and Shia Muslims. Clearly a religious conflict.
Dawkins fails to point out what part of these conflicts is truly religious in nature. Are these disputes over religious doctrines or principles or disagreements about the nature of God? If so, he should have pointed out exactly which parts of the conflicts were religious in nature. Of course, these are not conflicts about religion. They are conflicts involving different religious groups, but as with virtually all conflicts, the disagreements are about power. Dawkins seems to have forgotten his studies in psychology of human group dynamics. Groups of humans in power will oppress other groups, just based upon membership within each group. The membership could involve religion, language, or just geography. In fact, the demarcation could be as simple as labeling each group. Psychological studies of group behavior have shown that groups of people will become adversaries with others outside of their own group. Philip Zimbardo's famous Stanford prison experiment showed that students assigned to the category of guards physically abused their fellow students just because they were labeled as prisoners. In fact, the study went so much out of control that it had to be ended early.
The Los Angeles Times, 10th of April 2006, reported that numerous Christian groups on campuses around the United States were suing their universities for enforcing anti-discrimination rules, including prohibitions against harassing or abusing homosexuals.
What Dawkins doesn't explain is that these anti-discrimination rules are really anti-free speech rules that were instituted to prevent discussion of non-politically correct topics. A number of these rules have been overturned through court decisions based upon free speech, not freedom of religion, and most other universities have modified or eliminated their speech codes. Harassment and abuse has always been illegal, whether it is directed against homosexuals or heterosexuals.
As a typical example, in 2004, James Nixon, a 12-year-old boy in Ohio, won the right in court to wear a T-shirt to school bearing the words, "Homosexuality is a sin," Islam is a lie, abortion is murder. Some issues are just black and white. The school told him not to wear the T-shirt, and the boy's parents sued the school. The parents might have had a conscionable case if they'd based it on the First Amendment's guarantee of freedom of speech. But they didn't. Indeed, they couldn't, because free speech is deemed not to include hate speech. But hate only has to prove it is religious, and it no longer counts as hate. So, instead of freedom of speech, the Nixons' lawyers appealed to the constitutional right to freedom of religion.
Dawkins' statement is a lie. In fact, the student won on the basis of his free speech rights. The district court ruled that the school would be in the right if the T-shirt contained symbols and words that promote values that are so patently contrary to the school's educational mission. However, they said that speech that contains a potentially offensive political viewpoint is not included in this category of regulated expression. Note the word political, not religious. The court also found that the message was not hate speech, saying there is no evidence that James' silent, passive expression of opinion interfered with the work of Sheridan Middle School, or collided with the rights of other students to be let alone. Therefore, the court rejects defendants' assertion that James' T-shirt invaded on the rights of others. So, Dawkins just lied that the case revolved around religious rights instead of free speech rights. He also lied that the T-shirt would have been classified as hate speech.
The rest of this subchapter is filled with examples of extreme religious behavior which are ultimately tangential to the main line of argument, and since they are therefore irrelevant, we will pick up on the analysis again with his much more significant chapter, The God Hypothesis. See you then.